Its competition overshadowed it. It was inevitable that, thanks to the immense popularity of The Simpsons, there would eventually be other TV shows to come along that would be directly inspired by it. It was only a matter of time. So when shows like Family Guy or American Dad premiered, it would have been fair to consider that moment a chance for The Simpsons to finally start upping its game again. But instead, The Simpsons stayed the way it had for years. Instead of trying to compete with the other controversial cartoons on television, the series became more invested in finding ways to cross over with or reference Family Guy. The competitive, fiery spirit that defined the first 8 seasons of The Simpsons is now completely missing. How about some new or different side characters? It's been a long time since The Simpsons introduced a new character in Springfield quite as memorable or iconic as they did in their first several seasons. After populating Springfield with one of the most expansive and distinct ensembles on television, The Simpsons hasn't managed to truly build out or further diversify that roster in years. With the series being on the air for as long as it has been, it's understandable why the show's creative time might become a little too comfortable with the show's established characters and format. But that comfort has sent it into a rut as of late that keeps it from being as entertaining or boundary-pushing as it was in previous years. It's impossible to know if the introduction of a few new, memorable characters could help The Simpsons climb out of that rut, but it'd at least be a more productive step in that direction. A change in format is needed. It's always been true that, after a while, any show like The Simpsons can start to suffer from its traditional half-hour comedy format. For decades, that was merely a fact that viewers accepted when tuning into their favorite shows, but the TV industry has changed drastically throughout the past decade, and not just in the way that viewers consume new episodes. In addition, viewers have become more and more accepting of shows being more experimental with their formats and episodes. Shows like Atlanta, Community, or even Louie have all proven that a comedy series doesn't have to be constantly constrained by their traditional TV episode structures. So whether it's by trying out more multi-episode arcs or adopting a shifting perspective kind of narrative, The Simpsons could greatly benefit from some structural variety at this point. Is variety banned from Springfield? Similar to the point made above, The Simpsons has been on the air for too long for so little actual change to be made to Springfield. Now, that's not to say that some characters haven't gone in and out of the show, or that the series hasn't often found interesting ways of bringing completely implausible events into the show's central Midwestern town. But throughout The Simpsons' run, Springfield has more or less remained the same town it was when the series premiered in 1989. And in order for the series to truly reflect the absurdity of everyday modern American life, or to be an effective satirical take on that, then the way towns change and shape themselves in accordance with the times should be depicted as well. It's true that Springfield's apparent normality is integral to informing the actions of the show's characters. At this point, it's time for Springfield to go through some changes. The show fired its original composer. The show fired its original composer. It's hard to care about the family anymore. It's hard to care about the family anymore. There's been no character evolution. There's been no character evolution. The series doesn't feel fresh. It may seem, on the surface, unfair to criticize The Simpsons for losing some of its fresh appeal, almost 3 decades after it first debuted on TV screens. But the criticism isn't about The Simpsons not being considered as shocking or controversial as it was originally. The criticism is more about how stale the series feels when compared to its own writing and history. Nowadays, it's become commonplace for The Simpsons to either feel like nothing more than recycled versions of previous episodes, or worse, recycled takes on pop culture from other shows. For a series that made a name for itself for its originality in the 1990s, that's a long way to fall. The existential questions are nowhere to be found. Building off of the previous point, what made The Simpsons one of the greatest shows in history when it first premiered was how it managed to avoid being the typical TV comedy viewers might have expected. While the episodes were filled to the brim with jokes, the series also used that comedic lens to deal with difficult issues like depression, PTSD, and even free will. Episodes like Bart Sells His Soul or Homer's Enemy all delved into the psyche of its characters, whether it be Bart or the disgruntled Frank Grimes, without ever handling the topics in a heavy-handed fashion. The existential questions present in the show's first 8 or 9 seasons not only allowed the series to tackle a variety of topics, but fit in perfectly with the show's satirical take on the life of a normal American family. Now, The Simpsons very rarely, if ever, deals with those same kinds of questions. The Simpsons has lost its heart. There are very few TV shows, let alone comedies, that managed to ride the balance between humor, drama, and sadness the same way that The Simpsons did in its first 8 seasons. It was a tightrope walk that garnered the series so much acclaim in the first place. Episodes like Lisa's Substitute or Marge Be Not Proud are examples of when the series did that best, but in recent years, the number of those kinds of episodes has drastically decreased. So much so that it's hard to remember the last time The Simpsons actually tugged at viewers' heartstrings in any meaningful ways. All of this is to say that The Simpsons has forgotten to be the often surprisingly emotional comedy it was throughout a majority of the 1990s. Instead, it's become as generic of a TV sitcom as those it mocked for so many years. The characters have lost their way. One of the biggest criticisms that The Simpsons has faced in recent years is how simplified the characters in the series have become. After all, while Homer, Marge, Bart, Lucy, and Lisa were all based on archetypes that audiences were previously familiar with, The Simpsons managed to make them all memorable by taking the time to shade them in with more dimension than other shows or movies usually did. While Homer was a drunk, lazy, and often violently angry man, he also deeply loved his family and the town of Springfield. Similarly, Bart was an anarchic and rebellious teen who simultaneously caused trouble and suffered through deeply serious internal issues as well. Now, none of the decisions or jokes that characters make on the show feel in tune with those pre-established emotions and contradictions. Homer has devolved into being the dumb and mean father, while Bart often causes trouble just for the sake of causing trouble, rather than the trouble he causes being the manifestation of his own inner conflicts. The Simpsons is now in love with pop culture. It's hard to discuss The Simpsons nowadays without thinking of the many guest stars in the series. In particular, though, it's clear that by looking through the celebrity guest stars, that following its first 8 seasons or so, the series began losing its bite when it came to tired pop culture cliches. That's not to say that celebrity guests weren't ever a part of The Simpsons prior to the series' creative downturn. Obviously, Simpsons featured celebrity guest appearances from early on in its first season, but the tone of those appearances began to change drastically in the early 2000s. They stopped being fun Easter eggs for viewers to be surprised by, to being the sole selling points of episodes. And that change in attitude perfectly reflects how The Simpsons began transforming from a show that satirized common pop culture trends to one that embraced and capitalized on them. It stopped being an effective satire. It stopped being an effective satire. The jokes aren't as complex. The jokes aren't as complex. Almost none of the original staff is still around. Almost none of the original staff is still around.
Hey guys, thank you so much for the support and likes and comments down below, and also thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to see you in the next video. Then take care. Bye.